بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. قال المؤلف رحمة الله عليه: فصل: للصلاة نور عظيم تشرق به قلوب المصلين. Prayer has an immense light that causes the hearts of those who pray to radiate. وَلَا يَنَالُهُ إِلَّا الْخَاشِعُونَ. None will attain it except to those who are fearful in their prayer. He gave us some of the rulings on the prayer, the outward rulings. Now he's giving us some of the most important rulings, which are the inward rulings. Can you please listen? Thank you. He said, لِلصَّلَاةِ نُورٌ عَظِيمٌ تَشْرُقُ بِهِ قُلُوبُ الْمُصَلِّينَ. Prayer has an immense light that causes the hearts of those who pray to radiate. وَلَا يَنَالُهُ إِلَّا الْخَاشِعُونَ. But none will attain this light except those who are fearful in their prayer, who have the khushu'. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Only those who have khushu' in their prayer will be the successful people according to Allah in Surah Al-Mu'minun. May Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala grant us khushu'. Then he's giving us some tips. He said, فَإِذَا أَتَيْتَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَفَرِّقْ قَلْبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا فِيهَا. So if you come to the prayer, empty your heart of the dunya and what it contains. If you have any dunya problems, any worries, know that you're going to stand before the one who created dunya and the worries, who created you, and whatever goal or problem you may have. وَاللَّهُ خَلَقَكُمْ وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. Ismail, everything is all right? وَاشْتَغِلْ بِمُرَاقَبَةِ مَوْلَاكَ الَّذِي تُصَلِّي لِوَجْهِهِ. Preoccupy yourself with your Lord, the one to whom you are praying. Meaning, take dunya out of your brain and your heart and your mind. Preoccupy your full self, yourself with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. وَاعْتَقِدْ أَنَّ الصَّلَاةَ خُشُوعٌ وَتَوَاضُعٌ لِلَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ بِالْقِيَامِ وَالرُّكُوعِ وَالسُّجُودِ. Believe that the prayer is submissiveness and humbleness to Allah through the standing, bowing, and prostration. These physical activities you do when you pray, they're not meant to be done as they are physically. When you make the ruku', you have the khushu' that no one deserves that I bow before them but Allah. So that humiliating position is only for Allah. So as you do it, have that in your heart, because sometimes we have the habit to do the prayer to the extent the prayer now becomes a routine. We do the activities, we make sure the ruku' is good, the sujood is good, but the ruh of the salah itself is not there. Because ibadah is a body, but the sincerity and the khushu' and the hudur in ibadah is the ruh of that body. Without that ruh, the ibadah is dead. So he said, believe that the prayer is submissiveness, khushu', wa tawadu'un lillah, humbleness to Allah, bil qiyami, through the standing, wa ruku'i, bowing, and the was sujudi, and through the sujud, which is prostration. Wa ijlalun wa ta'zimun lahu bit takbiri wa tasbihi wa dhikri. It is exaltation. It is exaltation and glorification of Allah through the takbir, tasbih, and dhikr. when you are saying Subhana Rabbiyal Azim wa bihamdi, when you're saying Allahu Akbar, when you say Subhana Rabbiyal Ala, when you make the mention of Allah in the Salah, know that that is an exaltation, that is a means for you to have the presence of Allah's might and greatness in your heart. You are not just uttering these words with your tongue, but with your heart as well. Then he says, فَحَافِظْ عَلَى صَلَاتِكَ فَإِنَّهَا أَعْظَمُ الْعِبَادَاتِ. So protect your prayer, as it is the greatest act of worship. Because if the prayer is good, as the Prophet ﷺ says, everything else will be good. If the prayer is not good, nothing will be good. So we need to protect our prayers. Then he said, وَلَا تَتْرُكِ الشَّيْطَانَ يَلْعَبُ بِقَلْبِكَ وَيُشْغِلُكَ عَنْ صَلَاتِكَ. Do not allow the shaitan to play with your heart and distract you from the prayer. حَتَّى يَطْمِسَ قَلْبَكَ وَيَحْرِمَكَ مِنْ لَذَّةِ أَنْوَارِ الصَّلَاةِ. To the point that your heart is blind. Here, then is حَتَّى يَطْمِسَ قَلْبُكَ. Your heart is blind. So it's either shaitan causes your heart to blind, or you let yourself, you let shaitan play with your heart until your heart becomes blind. So he said, do not let shaitan play with your heart and distract you from the prayer to the point that your heart is blind and you are prevented from experiencing the pleasures of the light of the prayer. Because the Prophet ﷺ says, وَجُعِلَ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. The coolness of my eye is in prayer. So if we let shaitan distract us and play with our heart, we are going to have a spiritual blindness. And when one is spiritually blind, one cannot see the light of Allah in the prayer. And if one cannot see the light of Allah in the prayer, one cannot get the pleasure of prayer, the ladha of prayer, the rest in prayer. As the Prophet ﷺ used to tell Bilal, arihna biha ya Bilal. Whenever things were not okay, the Prophet ﷺ say, let us get some rest with prayer, O Bilal. Call for prayer. Sometimes the people, let me pray Isha and go get some rest. The Prophet ﷺ, when he's tired, he goes get some rest in prayer. He does not go pray and then go get some rest. His rest was in prayer. But he says only those who have khushu' and only those who fight the presence of shaitan in their salah will test this sweetness of iman and khushu' and nur in prayer. Then he says, فَعَلَيْكَ بِدَوَامِ الْخُشُوعِ فَإِنَّهَا تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ بِسَبَبِ الْخُشُوعِ فِيهَا. You must maintain khushu' during the prayer, as the prayer prevents fool and evil action because of that submissiveness. And then he says, فَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّهُ خَيْرُ مُسْتَعَانٍ. He's telling you that no matter what you do, you are not able to do it by yourself. So seek assistance from Allah. And He is the best assister. You see, when we say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ, what do we say? وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. Only you we worship. But without Him helping us, we cannot even do the worship. And from you only we seek help and assistance. What's the time? Then he says, فَصْلٌ لِلصَّلَاةِ الْمَفْرُوضَةِ سَبْعَةُ أَحْوَالٍ مُرَتَّبَةٍ تؤدي عليها أربعة من على الوجوب وثلاثة على الاستحباب. The obligatory prayer has 7 ordered ways that it can be, so it's تؤدى عليها, that it can be performed. It is obligatory to keep 4 of them in order and recommended to keep 3 in order. You say every single obligatory prayer has these 7 orderly ways of being performed. 4 of them, he say 3 of them are obligatory. And 4 of them are recommended. Meaning, if you do not do the 3 orderly ways, your salah will not be valid. Then he says, فَالَّتِي عَلَى الْوُجُوبِ أَوَّلُهَا الْقِيَامُ بِغَيْرِ اسْتِنَادٍ ثُمَّ الْقِيَامُ بِاسْتِنَادٍ ثُمَّ الْجُلُوسُ بِغَيْرِ اسْتِنَادٍ ثُمَّ الْجُلُوسُ بِاسْتِنَادٍ. Excuse me. 4 of them are obligatory and 3 of them are recommended. Then the 4 of them, he says, standing without leaning on anything. The first thing to do is to stand in prayer without leaning. If you are able to stand without leaning and you lean, then your prayer is not valid. Number 2 is standing while leaning on something. That means if you cannot stand without leaning, before you go sit down, lean on something. And then he said, number 3, sitting without leaning on anything. If you cannot stand without leaning, you cannot stand leaning, then sit without leaning. Then if you can't sit while leaning on something, it is obligatory to maintain order between these 4. فالترتيب بين هذه الأربعة على الوجوب. إذا قدر على حالة منها وصلى بحالة دونها بطل صلاته. If one is able to pray in one way and prays in a subsequent way, then his prayer is invalid. Let's say I can pray standing without leaning, and I pray sitting. And he's talking about the obligatory prayers. I can pray standing, and I on purpose pray sitting, my prayer is invalid. If I cannot pray standing without leaning, I pray then leaning, if that is my obligation, that is my fard. If I can't, that my fard is to sit without leaning. If I can't, then my fard is to sit leaning. If I do not respect these 4 orders, then my prayer is invalid, he said. Then he said, وَالثَّلَاثَةُ الَّتِي عَلَى الْإِسْتِحْبَابِ هِيَ أَنْ يُصَلِّيَ الْعَاجِزُ عن هذه الثلاثة المذكورة على جنبه الأيمن ثم على الأيسر ثم على ظهره فإن خالف في الثلاثة لم يبطل صلاته. The 3 that are recommended to keep in order for the one who is unable to pray in one of the 4 aforementioned fashions. If one cannot pray standing, cannot pray standing without leaning, he cannot pray standing leaning, he cannot pray sitting without leaning, he cannot pray sitting leaning, then these 3 things, to do them in order, these things that are coming to do them in order are just recommended. If you don't respect them, your prayer is still valid, but you did something that is makruh. So he said the 3 that are recommended to keep in order for the one who is unable to pray in one of the 4 aforementioned fashions. Fashions of prayers are to pray on the right side, meaning the number 1 is to pray on your right side. If you have to, lie down when you pray, the first thing is recommended, pray on your right side. If you can't, then on your left side. If you can't, then on the back. But if one does not maintain the order between these 3, his prayer is valid. Your prayer is still valid, but you did something that is makruh. Okay? والاستناد الذي تبطل به صلاة القادر على تركه هو الذي يسقط بسقوطه وإن كان لا يسقط بسقوطه فهو مكروه. He said the leaning that would invalidate, actually he did not say the 3 ones, these 3 to not respect them is makruh. What he says is makruh is here. He said والاستناد الذي تبطل به صلاة القادر على تركه هو الذي يسقط بسقوطه وإن كان لا يسقط بسقوطه فهو مكروه. the leaning that would invalidate the prayer for the one who can do without it is that which would cause a person to fall. If that thing were to fall, if a person would not fall with the falling of what he was leaning on, then it is makruh. He says, meaning if you depend on what you are leaning on, and you are able to pray without leaning on, if you lean on something that if it falls, you will fall, that is the leaning that will nullify your prayer. If you don't depend on that fully, that means if it falls, you don't fall, you are just doing something that is disliked, but the prayer is not nullified. Then he said, وَأَمَّا النَّافِلَةُ فَيَجُوزُ لِلْقَادِرِ عَلَى الْقِيَامِ أَنْ يُصَلِّيَهَا جَالِسًا وَلَهُ نِصْفُ أَجْرِ الْقَائِمِ. As for the nafila prayer, it is permissible for the one who can stand to pray sitting down. But he gets only half of the reward of the one who stands. Just like Saifu. Where is Saifu? He left? So in nafila, if you can stand, you can choose to sit. But he says you are going to only have half of the reward of one standing. Then he said, وَيَجُوزُ أَنْ يَدْخُلَهَا جَالِسًا وَيَقُومَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ أو يدخلها قائما ويجلس بعد ذلك إلا أن يدخلها بنية القيام فيها فيمتنع جلوسه بعد ذلك. It is permissible to enter the prayer sitting and then stand thereafter, or to enter it standing and then to sit thereafter. Remember, he's talking about nafila, non-obligatory prayer. But if he entered the prayer with the intention to perform it standing, in which case it would be prohibited for him to sit afterwards. Meaning when I entered the nafila, my intention was to stand the entire nafila prayer, then I cannot sit afterwards. But if I didn't do any specific intention, then I can change my mind. That's what he's actually saying. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يتقبل منا ومنكم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد على آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم آمين.